What's the eeriest, creepiest place you've been? Story 1. There used to be an abandoned community college in the foothills near my house, and every so often we'd muster the nerve to go visit. The rumors were that this had been a Christian community college, and that one year they closed down in a huge rush for no apparent reason. This hadn't been an orderly, organized departure either. A cheap rent-a-fence had been erected all the way around the campus, and a lot of personal belongings, mattresses and bedding, textbooks and binders, entire dorm room setups had been left behind. The place was just vacated and left to be reclaimed by nature. Waist-high grass grew between all of the buildings, and every now and then as you waded through, you'd startle a deer that had wandered in through a hole in the fence. This was prime real estate, too, located right next to a golf course in one of the most upscale communities in the area, and so for it to remain dormant and unsold for years struck us as odd. Rumors were that there had been deaths there, possibly a possession, and that the old owners refused to sell it for fear of releasing whatever malevolent spirits resided within. And when you entered some of the buildings, you could almost start to believe the rumors. Insulation draped out of the ceiling in long slashes, gaping holes were missing from the walls, and as you gingerly walked down the silent hallways, flashlight shaking in your hand, every black doorway would seem to loom out of the darkness like an open maw. Creepiest of all was the old church building, every wall of which had been graffitied with satanic messages and swastikas. One wall in huge dripping red letters simply read, "Poor little Jenny." I recognized in retrospect that the real risk there was not encountering the occult, but rather coming across the addicts/vagrants/cannibalistic Nazi zombies that had taken up residence on the abandoned campus. Fortunately, we never did, and so every so often we'd slip through a hole in the fence and go skulking around the hallways, nervously muttering jokes and trying to scare the girls in our groups, if only to mask that we ourselves were scared crapless. Anyway, last night I went to the abandoned campus, 2 drama friends, and approached the main gate via a long tree-lined road that ran parallel to the golf course. As we drew near it, it became clear that something was amiss. Where normally there would be a ragged hole in the fence that you'd catch your sweater on as you slipped through, the chain-link fence was instead brand new and perfectly intact. We were about to turn back, secretly relieved, when one of us noticed that the chained and padlocked gate had actually been pried open just wide enough that someone could slip through if they turned sideways. We scanned the fence line and the campus beyond, and though we noticed that a broke-down old car had also materialized 20 feet beyond the gate, where we were pretty sure none had ever been before, a quick check with a flashlight revealed no one inside. Since the gate was locked from the outside, we decided this development posed no threat, and so one by one, each of the 3 of us turned sideways, sucked in our gut, and slipped through the mangled gate. Cautiously, our little group proceeded forward into the high grass. It was a new moon that night, and so the only visible lights were our flashlights and the porch lights twinkling in the neighborhood beyond. We were 10 feet into the deserted campus when, without warning, that broken-down old car roars to life, its high beams blazing right at us, its engine revving like a stallion out of hell and ready to just burst out of the gate. We shrieked like the pubescent high schoolers we were and bolted back to the gate, each of us grappling and pulling at the others in desperation to be the first one to slip back through. Being the smallest of the 3, I was pushed to the back and spent a panicked eternity of several seconds shouting hoarsely at my friends to hurry as they scrambled through the gap, certain that at any instant the demonic car would come barreling down upon me, or worse, I would feel a yank on my collar and the gate would slip from my grasp and some howling ghoul dragged me off to sacrifice me upon an altar newly consecrated in Satan's name. Finally, my friends were clear of the gate and I forced my way through, the sharp metal tines raking at my skin as I flopped into the dust on the other side. We are half stumbled, half sprinted, all the way down that tree-lined lane, the roar of the car's engine echoing behind us as we ran. Even as we reached our own car, parked a quarter-mile away on a street in that upscale neighborhood, still that car's high beams pierced into the darkness as though searching for us, the tortured revving of its engine rending the still night air. We never did go back to that campus. 1 year later, we found out it had been torn down and that the land would be repurposed for another subdivision. That night still sticks with me, though. None of us ever mentioned it after, but a singular question has always burned in my mind. We had checked the interior of that car. We shined a flashlight on it from 20 feet away, and there was definitely no one in the driver's seat. So who then, or what, had started that car? So to be fair, from 20 feet away, you aren't seeing down into it. Seriously, there could have been a person living in there who thought they were safe to crash there, saw the light shining into their car, thought the cops or those graffiti Nazis were going to get them, and tried to scare them away, ready to bolt through the gates if need be. That'd be my guess. Story 2. A few years back, I went on a big road trip across the US and Canada with my significant other and our mutual friend. We were driving down the west coast. Our friend mentioned there was an abandoned nuclear power plant that he had read about that was supposed to be very easy to sneak into. Sounded awesome to us, so we all decided to go do some exploring. This power plant is supposedly the one that inspired Matt Groening, and it definitely looks like the familiar Springfield plant we know. The first thing we noticed driving up were the twin smokestacks, but oddly enough, instead of feeling nostalgic for one of my favorite cartoons, I felt inexplicably anxious. When you get closer, you see that although the stacks look side by side, they are actually across the plant from each other. We parked near a building close to one, and I remember getting out of the car and looking at the massive concrete structure with almost dizzying fear. The boys didn't seem to feel the same apprehension at all and took off towards the closest one immediately. As you get closer, you can really see the grand scale of it. There's an affixed staircase up the side of it, allows you to roughly imagine your size in comparison. They are massive. There's a chain link fence and some forested area surrounding them, so we searched a bit until we found a section of fence that they could shimmy under so they could get a closer look. The stack is hollow and raised off the ground with a large depression in the dirt underneath, so it was easy for the boys to get underneath it. There was a lot of trash and graffiti, including an excellent one of Mr. Burns in silhouette. The boys took lots of photos and recorded the strange swirling echoes that occurred when they yelled. I stayed firmly on the other side of the fence. I wish I could explain what it was about that place in particular that made me so uneasy. The closest thing I can think of is that it felt like an enormous sleeping creature that did not want to be disturbed. I feel like the scariest thing about sneaking into a fenced-off old nuclear power plant would be radiation. I'm sure they're supposed to do a ton to make sure it's clean and all. Well, maybe. Maybe that's what the fence is for. Either way, it does sound pretty cool to get to see up close like that, especially with the extra eyes. Story 3. When I was in my early teens, I lived in a small town in southern Indiana, one of the oldest towns in the state. A ton of the buildings in town are 100 plus years old. I never felt comfortable in the old downtown area at any time of day or night. One night I spent the night at a friend's house, and as you do when you can't sleep in a small town, you go walking around, mainly to pass the time and BS. So we are walking down Main Street, and all of a sudden, things don't feel right anymore. We soon see a little girl standing in the street wearing very old-styled clothes, like late 1800s. My dumb butt yells, "Hello!" which the girl stops, looks at us, and then at first seems surprised someone noticed her, and then the look changed like when a cat is after prey. Both of us instantly noped the F out and ran back to his house, never once looking back. Several years later, another friend of mine had moved into an apartment in an old cotton mill from the 1800s that they had converted into apartments recently. I hadn't been back to that town in nearly 10 years at that point. I'd always avoided that building when they gave us tours, etc. when I was younger due to bad vibes. But that night I spent there was one of the most uneasy in my life. From the moment I walked in, I had that "you need to get the F out" feeling. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I had the feeling of being watched the entire time by something that did not like or want me there. As soon as my friend woke up, we left. That was the last time I was in the town. I have no desire to ever go back. That area of the country is full of weird, evil places. Most of the times of my life I've seen things I cannot explain were there. Story 4. My family owns a house on a mountain in a small town in the Blue Ridge Mountains. One of the houses on our road has been abandoned since about 2010. An elderly woman lived alone in that house up until she passed away, and the house has been basically left alone for almost 10 years. Last time I saw her, she was very frail but loved sitting on her tiny front porch. I was up at our house in October when my parents brought up the old house, and we decided to go walk the 100 yards down to look at it. Just walking down the driveway is a little chilling. Granted, walking in the woods on that mountain is a bit scary no matter what time of day. We noticed that the windows to the basement were open and the screens were out, so obviously my friend climbed through the window. He came up the stairs, unlocked the front door, and we went. The house looked like she had just been there. Dishes in the sink, clothes hanging in the closet, bills and mail on the kitchen table. Parts of the ceiling in one of the bathrooms had collapsed because of a bad storm that had hit the area. All of her books were still on the shelves, and her Bible was open with a bookmark. We noticed that someone had been gathering her old letters and photographs, and it also looked as though a realtor had begun to fix up the property in order to resell it. From what my grandmother has told us, and from what we gathered from some of the old lady's old letters, she was estranged from her children and her husband and passed away years ago. Might not be the creepiest place I've ever been. I didn't necessarily feel uncomfortable or unwelcome, and we didn't go in with bad intentions, but it was definitely one of the more depressing places I visited. Wow, there was something really sadly beautiful about that. Like, definitely sad that she was alone like that. I wouldn't want that for anyone, but the fact that it was preserved like that you were able to see how she left it all those years later, there's just something kind of poetic about that. Is it just me? Story 5. About a year ago, my friend and I went to some woods in our neighborhood. I live in Florida, and there's tons of random woods and wetlands. There was a cool bridge, and on the way there, we found a notebook, so we were like, epic, and put it in my backpack to bring home. We read some of it. It had rained recently, so some parts were unreadable. Only about 5 pages were filled, and it was just random phone numbers, an unfinished letter, random names, a doctor's name, and the author's playlist. We Googled some of the names. The only one that came up was a S offender who was recently put on parole in the county. He was in jail for R-ing a 13-year-old. My brother was stupid enough to call the number. A man answered. He was stupid enough to say what area we lived in and that the name of the guy was written. He was saying he didn't know anything about a journal, and it was weird we found one with his number in our area. When we mentioned the S offender's name, the dude on the other line got awkward. My friend and I, in the meantime, were begging my brother to hang up and stop saying crap. I forced the phone out of his hand, and we told my mom, "Don't worry, we used star 67. My mom took it and gave us a lecture about calling weird numbers. She was going to give it to the cops, but I don't know if she did. Not really about the place, but it just creeps me out now thinking about the journal. Story 6. The woods behind my childhood home. I'd explore them all the time and had heard rumors of a witch lady living nearby. Apparently, she lived in a street that was a few hundred meters in the woods, and she was a Wiccan or something. Well, I learned the hard way by exploring too deep into the woods, where I found a circular clearing around a huge tree, and the place was surrounded by weird skulls and stones and dream catchers and strange stuff like that. And under the tree at the base of it was a flat stone that looked like an altar or some sacrificial table, and nearby a rope with a basket tied to it that went all the way up the tree. Needless to say, I got curious and went a few more times until one time the witch lady caught me and I booked it out of there. I was scared crapless. Later on, after having been moved away for a few years, the next town over, I moved back to that town and was like 17 years old. Well, I got curious and literally went up to the lady's front door and knocked, and she answered and right away recognized me as the boy who had trespassed about 7 years earlier. She was very nice and explained to me that she's not a witch and some other things I can't remember. But yeah, don't trespass on witch lady property. That is really good advice. Don't trespass because you think someone might be creepy. People aren't there for your entertainment. But also, kids will be kids, and I wouldn't suggest a kid that age go knock on a stranger's door either. Also, I have to say, that woman's house sounds absolutely lovely. I would honestly love to live deeper in the woods with a bunch of stuff like that around. Story 7. Not me, but my mom. When she was young, she would have night terrors almost every night that people were chasing her. Then this would happen. Her dream self would always run to a tiny door to get away from whatever was chasing her. This door was never anywhere specific in the dreams, and every time she would go in, the dream would end, or she would wake up so she never knew what was behind it. She just knew it was a safe spot to get out of the dream. When she was pregnant with me and house hunting with my father, they were touring a house that supposedly gave her an eerie feeling the minute they walked in, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what was throwing her off. Eventually, they got to looking at the attic. When she went up there, the first thing she noticed was a tiny door identical to the one in her childhood dream, her safe place. She never knew what was behind that door as a kid, and she still doesn't to this day. She immediately decided this was not the house for her. I'm not sure why she never looked behind the door, but I know for sure if I was in her shoes, I would have. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.